All right, so this is our first totally biased aside. Our first
Bonus episode, yeah,
yeah,
right.
a little bonus episode. So we're gonna talk Civil War by Alex Garland. Wrote and directed it, correct? Correct, Anthony?
Correct.
Okay,
He did.
so A24 film. So I don't know. What were your initial thoughts? Tell me about it.
So I think, like most people, you have these kind of preconceived notions about what the movie's going to be about. I mean, you have this idea of a country divided, a civil war, what's going on, and then it's a matter of what is the director going to show you? What is the story that he's going to tell? And this was not, so this is going to be a full of spoiler episode. So if you haven't seen it, go see it. Go see it twice, go see it in IMAX, do it justice because this movie got me from the beginning, dude. Did you see it in IMAX?
I did, of course. I
So,
see
I
every
mean,
movie in IMAX if I have a
that you
chance.
can. There you go, right? Christopher Nolan's got an IMAX remaster coming out soon.
Yeah, of
But
course it is.
but um I mean, there's a sound check at the beginning of the film where the coming from every direction, and that I think is such a necessary, not maybe not necessary, but super intentional thing to show the viewer, all right, this you're set, you're how do we say this? You know how when you go to a show and you're going to see a performer that you might wear earplugs for, you know how wise it is to wear earplugs like 20 minutes before the set starts, so you're kind of like
Right.
prepping your ears for what you're going to experience. I think he does that from the get-go. But this movie, dude, it is so interesting because there's not a clear, there is only maybe once or twice throughout the film where you know who is on which side, quote side, right? As far as
Yeah.
the Western Front versus the armed forces versus people with guns just holding down the fort. There's so many different aspects to this, but this movie was very surprising to me because it is a travel film. They start in one place and you know where their destination is, and you know kind of that they're going to stop at some places, but we don't know what they're going to encounter, and it's told from the perspective of war journalists, right, of photographers and filmographers. And that is such an interesting angle to take because that is how us a lot of humans understand war. That's the only way some people can understand war, is through the lens of a photographer or a videographer. Um, or unless you have, obviously people that you can communicate with who have firsthand experience. But from the lens of a camera, it's so interesting. And the things that he does in this movie with sound and with silence, that is what resonated with me the most, was the ability to stop a gunfight in mid frame and show you a shot, to show it in black and white, to go from a silent part to massive gunfire raining down, you know,
Yeah.
to see ugly things. It's kind of a funny thing that he did it this way. And I was listening to an interview with Garland, and he talks about how there's a moment where they have these guys in camouflage who are dressed as soldiers, but there's no identification as to them being actual soldiers. I think that's a running theme throughout the film, is recognizing that on a lot of the people with guns, let's say, they don't have patches on until they actually meet with the Western Front. So there's all these people, but they put bags on their head and they murder them. And they're playing a De La Soul song in the background, which is really interesting to have this very horrific act happening in real time in front of you while this music is playing, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is something that Garland's mentioned, that is the magic of film that you can do, where you can put two things together that may not make sense conceptually, and they may not make sense in actuality, but it creates a moment that resonates, or it can stick into your brain and make you think upon what are you actually observing versus what are you feeling while you're observing it. I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of feeling that happens in this movie, um, in the journey from Kirsten Dunst's character, who is struggling within herself because she's seeing a younger version of herself go through things that she went through, and I think she's torn visibly from it. I love what she does throughout this movie. It really reminds me a lot of a role she played in a movie called Melancholia by Lars von Trier. It's a dark ass movie, but it's so beautifully done and it's hypnotic. And the way she kind of just loses herself in the camera, time and time again. She smiles twice in this movie, and it's for those photos,
Yeah.
that is being taken of her. Um, but I had a great time. I saw it again, and I got more out of it the second time because I got to look at details, realizing I already knew what was to come. But I had a great time, man. I mean, like I said, it's not a pleasant movie. It's kind of, I mean, it's fucked that this could actually be a reality. I found he wrote this movie in 2020, and the movie is about a fascist president who has, he's this is his third term
Right.
as president. He's disbanded the FBI, and they've airstriked U.S. citizens. So there's all these things that you're hearing has happened that you're not seeing.
Yeah.
There's gunfire in the distance at night that you're seeing from a distance, but you're not there. And I think that is an interesting angle to take too, which is like, we're not going to show you everything. We're not going to show you fucking citizens fighting each other, but we are going to show you organized militias. We are going to show you um, terror that's happening, but we're also going to show you how people can still come together and find harmony amongst this. That scene at the football field, which is shot in Atlanta. I'm really excited to go there and go find that field. Because even the graffiti, you can see like they didn't change anything of the
Yeah.
graffiti. It still says ATL on it, even though it's supposed to be like
Yeah.
northeastish area. But I had a really great time, man. I'm excited to get your opinion. I'm not gonna say nervous, but I can expect I can expect an angle and a big butt coming at some point. But let me hear your
this
thoughts.
is
I'll
this
let
is
you
what
go.
I'll say. So I think what what fucked this movie up with a lot of the public perception of it, and kind of to a degree my perception, is the advertising angle they took on this movie was not indicative of what the movie was at all. And the thing that you say about the factions, right? Like the Western forces, there's the Western forces, the Florida Alliance, the Loyalist states. Those are the three factions, right?
Mhm.
If you had not watched the trailers, if you had not watched interviews from Alex Garland, then you wouldn't essentially, from watching the movie, know any of that. And what's weird to me is the trailers of the movie, they have multiple. They have a scene in the very first trailer where the president is giving a speech on television, and he says the Western forces of California and Texas, something, something, something. Right? Doesn't
Mhm.
give it in the movie.
Oh, but he
He
does.
has no, he
Yeah,
doesn't.
in the opening, yeah, in the hotel, in Kirsten Dunst's hotel room. It's like the first scene
Oh,
where
the very first scene.
she inherently, now this is an interesting thing, and I almost texted you before you saw it, and I was going to say Kirsten Dunst shoots the president in the first 5 minutes of the film, but she shoots her with a camera,
Right, right.
while he's on the speed
Yeah,
on
yeah,
the TV, and he does say, like, yeah, the Western Front has gotten up to this point, and the Florida Alliance has failed in some sense, but
right.
I think there is
I
a shooting parallel too throughout
Yeah,
this
and
film.
I just think like they advertised this movie, and this I guarantee you this was not at Alex Garland's discretion, right? It was an attempt to advertise this movie. They advertised this movie as an action movie or as a horror movie almost, is kind of what the first trailer gives off. Like it's
Mm.
kind of scary, but I wouldn't say a horror movie, but there's ominous tones to it, and the movie itself is not anything like the trailers. And had I gone in and not watched a single trailer and had watched the movie, I think I would have enjoyed it a lot more. The problem is like it's when you watch those trailers, there's so much more to the trailers themselves, like the trailer for Civil War specifically, where like they talk more about the factions, and like they I don't know if you noticed, they released the map
Yeah, I
on
saw
Twitter where the map showed kind of what states were part of what alliance or whatever. And like to me that bothered me because when you go watch the movie, none of that information is important. It's really
Right.
not. Like, and that's kind of what bothers me is like, why take this press angle? Why take this advertisement angle? Why put out the map? Why talk about it when they don't really explore any of those themes? And I don't have a problem with that. Like, they don't explore kind of the beforehand or the aftermath or kind of what led the president to this, or they don't talk a lot about that, and I don't have a problem with that in and of itself. I think the movie is good in the sense that it's about it, like you said, it's about war journalists, and it's an interesting story, and there's some great shots. The sound is
Mhm.
so good in IMAX, like the gunshots, and like you said, when there's shit popping off and exploding, and then they take the picture and it freezes and it's black and white and there's no sound. And like the third act, like I said when we were talking about Annihilation, the third act of this movie really brings it home, and it's a great third act. And like, but it's frustrating to me because I felt like the press lead up to it and the advertisement lead up to it made it seem as if it was going to be a different type of movie, and it's a theme that could have been explored in a whole different avenue of things. And like essentially the president has one line in the movie, right? Like apart from the speech at the beginning, he has the one line which is "Don't let them kill me,"
Yeah.
and they kill him. And like and you don't see any sort of, and like I said, I do not have a problem with not seeing the leading up to it or not seeing the aftermath of killing the president, right? I understand that's not the context of the movie. My problem is they advertise it as if it would be. And
Now,
that part really, really bothers me about the film.
Now, I think there is an angle to be mentioned, which could be distrust of media, potentially purposeful or not. I do not know because I don't. You know me very well in a sense where like I will actively avoid trailers or any type of insight into something until I can see it for what it is. And like it bothers me in movie theaters that they make you sit through trailers that I don't want to see Maxine trailer right now. I have to
Right.
stare at my phone and like actively think about something else for 3 minutes or walk out of the room because I know that this trailer is going to influence me whether I want it to or not. And it's something that I have to, it's fucked up that you have to purposely detach yourself from something knowing that it's going to affect something in the future. But
Yeah.
I do think that the media does people a disservice when they do things like that. But also, some directors, and I don't think Garland is one, are known to create misleading trailers too.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that does like when they have a map, it puts you in the frame of mind or like, all right, we're going to see these people versus those people. But in
Right.
reality, as you're moving along this movie, you don't know who's on what until you get to the Western forces. I mean, you
Yeah.
have people they're in Charlottesville, but like the guys at the gas station are just guys at the gas station. You know, he
Yeah.
says that I went to high school with that guy, right? He's
Yeah.
hanging up there. The New York scene is just chaos, right?
Yeah.
But I think that it it speaks to the point of like what is the purpose of marketing when it comes to films, right? Is it to get people in the seats, but at what cost too?
Yeah.
Uh,
And I think
Unfortunately,
that's kind of what like, and I don't know. I don't. It's a very slow film,
hmm
and I don't have a problem with that. And I think there's great shots, and the story is great. And I was engaged the entire time that I watched it. But I had also read, that it wasn't basically that was like it's not what you think it is. So I kind
right?
of knew like don't go into this thinking it's going to be a war epic, which is kind of what they advertised it as. But like there are like even to the point where they if you go back and watch the first trailer, the scene in the movie where their friend pulls up beside them
Oh yeah.
and he's jumping in their car or
hmm
whatever, if you go watch the trailer, they pin it, they show that scene and they show this the scene of Jesse, the girl, like screaming in terror. They frame it as somebody is trying to
That's
get into their
and that's
car, right?
that is misleading,
And
100%.
exactly. And they do, and like, and that's the thing is seeing that and then seeing the movie, it's like you intentionally did this, and that kind of bothers me because had they framed it as a war journalist movie, like you're not going to see all this stuff. Like it would have, I think it would have landed with me better. Now to say
Yeah.
it didn't land with me is would be incorrect. I still enjoyed it, and like I said, like the third act really kind of sells it. Like the scene in the White House, the sounds in the White House when they're going through the street, like all that
Yeah.
stuff is crazy when they get in. And the scene with the press secretary or
Yeah.
whoever she is, and she's trying to negotiate, they're like, they just shoot her. They're like, fuck this,
Yeah.
we're not doing this. Like, and
Hmm.
it is really indicative of what I think a civil war would be like. But I would have liked like them to explore those themes more, right? Like, why is this happening? What is their goal after the fact? You know, and I do love the line where he says, um, you'll see, like, I don't remember what the exact phrase was, like, you'll see they'll turn on each other, essentially, because like that is like
Oh yeah.
when you have Texas and California on the same side, like,
Mhm.
yeah, of course, like the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? Like there is going to be something that happens after, but like it's one line and then they kind of just move on and then they never talk about it again. No one in the movie mentions it again. And I would have liked to have just, there were themes that were left unexplored in my mind,
I
and
think
that
definitely.
I wish they could have and should have done more, is my opinion.
Well, I think that, films being limited, right? I mean, to say it's an hour 50 minutes of a movie, and it paces the way it does, right? You can only do so much. You can only show so much. But I think there are things that do pay off, right? There's a line where they're talking about, right, we're gonna interview the president, and then they talk about, all right, make sure you just like don't let him fucking kill him first, right? And then they talk about Gaddafi and some other dictators who were murdered, but also cowards at the end of their life. And I think that kind of resonates at the very end, which is, his last line saying, please don't let him kill me, right?
Yeah,
But I think this movie, I think everyone wants it to be something different, right? Everyone wants to see certain things play out or certain avenues explored. But
oh, I lost you.
there
Oh,
you go.
there you
Sorry,
go,
I
you're back.
accidentally tap mute on my mic. But everyone wants it to be something, but it can only be the story he wants to tell, right? Which is the
Yeah,
perspective of these people. And you hear Kirsten Dunst say, it's not our job to ask those questions. It's our job to document and portray
right,
actual what is happening right now. And I think that is the genesis of the movie, which is you are going to see what is happening in this moment of time, and your brain's going to go the places it's going to go. And I think that
right.
is what Garland is really good at, which is, of course, it's beautiful. The tracking shots are beautiful. The battle scenes are epic. I think the idea of the photographers and the soldiers or the militias are one and the same. They're shooting with their camera, they're shooting with their guns, they're in harm's way, so are they. But I think what Garland does is he puts you in those shoes, but he's not going to tell you where to go or what to think. It's going to
Right.
be what you want it to be. And I think that it hits with some people, it doesn't with others. And either way, I think it's special. That's why, like a movie like this, I've written it as a necessary viewing for people to see it, but then to think on it and have conversations like this, because I think it's divisive, just as the movie itself is divisive. There's divisions within the movie. Again, harping back to that Tool track, I think that is what resonated with me so much, was like, we're all like, what is the point of living if we're gonna just fuck each other up? And then you have
Yeah,
people who are just acting like nothing's going on, which I understand that mindset very well, which is to say, what can you do? These people are going to be fighting. I'm just going to go over here and mind my own business,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know?
And I think it's like it is a cool story. Like the the context of it. I was thinking of this during the movie. Is like if you were to make a movie about war journalists, war photographers, nobody would go see it. Like,
Right.
sorry, that's America. Like, nobody gives a shit. Like, whether they want to or not, like, there's a very small group of people that give a shit. And I think framing it the way that they did as a civil war was interesting because it brings people to the movie, right? And it
Yeah.
still tells
It's proving.
the story is about war journalists. And I think that's interesting because they are important to, like you said earlier, how we view war. And I think that's really a really cool message and theme for a movie. But I think like, and I like that, you know, there's a clear intention of leaving so much out of the movie, right? Leaving so much to the imagination. He's not picking a side. He's not saying who's good. He's not saying who's bad. And it's like kind of you have to decide, but you still could have done that with a little more context. is really like my
I
thing,
mean,
you know,
I get
like
it. I think you
zero
could.
context. Like, where
Well,
the,
I
how
mean,
the fuck did we get here, man? What's going on?
well, there are hints. There are hints, right? Like I said, just the lack of identification. Jesse Plemons, when he's doing his fucking thing, which I found out the other day, he was cast for. He was
Yeah, last
a
minute,
follow
right?
up. Like he replaced somebody who was originally going to be in that role and fucking crushed it.
Killed it. Yeah,
And like that scene, no one has any identification. He doesn't have a badge. He doesn't have a patch. He doesn't even have regular sunglasses on. His
yeah,
red. So it's like anybody can get a gun. I think that is very much the case in our country, right?
yeah.
Or a lot of people can get guns, and a lot of people can fall into this mob mentality. You know,
Right.
it's us versus them, right? But who is us? Who are they? Is it anybody that
Right.
opposes us? Fuck you, we're gonna hang you. I mean, it's like it draws up all these different toxic parts, I think, of our culture, and maybe doesn't put it on full display, but the seeds are there. The
Yeah.
mass grave, full tossing lie on the mass grave. I mean, like
Yeah.
those are citizens. They're not in uniform, but like again, I think it's a lot of his films, I believe, are not, they may be perceived as warnings, in a sense where like you have Ex Machina, which is not long ago predicting this AI kind of takeover. In a sense, that's my interpretation of that. Um,
Right.
or AI integrating into the world. And then you have Annihilation, which is this kind of genetic mutation type of film in my mind. Men, I think, is all about toxic masculinity and how it could be viewed from the mind of a woman, which is it's a crazy movie. I don't know if you haven't seen Men, have
No.
you?
No.
I don't think you would enjoy it, but maybe over time you might understand the lens of what he's telling you through that film. Devs is kind of like a sequel to Ex Machina, a spiritual sequel where there's an AI kind of there's a technology that's there and stuff starts to happen. It's way deeper than Ex Machina. In a sense, it's like an 8 episode series, but it's beautifully done. Um, and then you have the Civil War, which I think is just a near future, potential near future. I think
Yeah.
him writing it when he did, you can't not have Trump in mind. You can't not have just a
Right.
polarity of a country, a divisiveness of a country at the forefront of your mind when you write something like this. And I think it does translate in that way to say, be careful because this is not that far. It might be a dystopian film, but it's not that far away,
Right. Right.
right?
And I think that's very obvious with the scenery, right? That's what's so like
Mm-hmm.
in your face is like it looks like normal America, right? It doesn't look. It's not a dystopian film. To this thing where the America's destroyed and everything's on fire and everything's falling apart. Like it looks like normal America. They're just rolling through the streets of DC or the South
Mm-hmm.
Carolina, wherever they are, and everything looks
Right.
normal. In this scene, I love the scene where they go in and he says, like, are you aware there's a pretty huge civil war going on right now? And she's like, yeah, we're not fucking worried about it, man. Let us do our shit. Like, if that would be like the majority of Americans is
Mm-hmm.
they're just like, look, man, we're just trying to pay our bills and live our lives. Like, leave us out of it. And I
Exactly.
thought that was very poignant. And like, and one of the cool parts about it, kind of to that point, is when they're outside on the street smoking a cigarette, and he's like, look around. He's like, don't make it obvious or whatever. And she looks up and there's guys with guns like on the roof, So
Yeah.
like it looks normal, but it's not normal at the same time. And I think that's kind of how
Mm-hmm.
that scenario would play out. But like I said, I enjoyed it. I didn't leave the theater thinking like this was some amazing life changing film. I thought it was a good movie that I liked watching, but I also understand why people don't like it. And the audience score, I think it was Jordan, like the audience score has dropped like day by day. It's gotten worse and worse and worse. And I think part of that is like the misleading advertising to it, right? So I get why people are leaving dissatisfied, but I also enjoyed it. So I don't, it's a rare movie for me where I'm like, it was good. Like I either have that movie fucking sucked ass or like that movie was phenomenal. And like I said earlier in the episode, like Garland's kind of background for me has been he makes good movies. I don't think they're phenomenal. I don't think they're bad. I think they're good, and that's, kind of how I left this movie.
Yeah. I think too, there's so much to say about preconceived notions, right? And it's when you compare like an album that drops to a movie that builds hype. You know, it's the nature of the beast, which is there's so many pieces of a movie, you know, so many humans that contribute to a movie that have to be supported in a sense that is it's such a financial funding thing. I mean, this is Alex Garland's biggest movie. I mean, if you look at
Yep.
Annihilation, you look at Ex Machina, you look at Men, these are cast of maybe 10 people in a location, right? They're not venturing out. This is the first
Right.
film that he shot that's actually set in the United States in a culture versus it being in a remote place or at a lighthouse, in a South Beach kind of place.
Right.
Or Men is just in the countryside, right? So it tells you what he can do with a budget. I think it speaks a lot because the production itself is there, the quality is there, the storytelling is also there, but it is on a bigger scale. When you have people cross country traveling, I mean, think about every cross country movie you've seen. It is we're here and then we're segueing to there, you know. And I think that this movie is that, but you got to pick and choose what you're gonna highlight, right?
Yeah. No,
But
for sure.
but I think some of the liberties being sound, some of the liberties being the snapshots, you know, just the photo developing at the end was very beautiful. But something that if you see this movie again, something I want you to do is the last. I have a problem with the last song when the president is shot. The song that's being played, it is such a shift in tone to me from the entire movie. And I had a conversation with a guy outside of the movie afterwards, and I felt the same way, but I couldn't express myself right then to in a way that I'm about to, because if you listen, if you watch that movie and you play Goodbye Blue Sky at the end, it is going to mean so much more, I
Yeah,
feel,
that's
than
fair.
the
I can
song
see it
that's actually
already.
being played. Dude, it is such a, because it's a haunting feeling of what is next, right?
Right.
Because you don't know, you're not going to be shown what's next. But I think in my mind, you know, the war's not over. It's a
Yeah.
constant battle for power. And I think that if I could change one thing, or if I could get a-Rod cut of this film, then we're gonna put "Goodbye Blue Sky" at the end. That's the only adjustment I would make,
Yeah. No, that's
because
fair.
the song threw me off afterwards, because it's a bouncy track, you know, and I feel like Garland's movies are this kind of like warning, this foreshadowing kind of tone, this ominous feeling that you described. Um, but I think you throw "Goodbye Blue Sky" at the end, and then it does what it needs to do, which is leave you on this note of like, oh wow, this is not roses at the end.
Yeah. No,
Mm-hmm.
for sure. Well, yeah, I'm glad we got to talk about it, guys. If you listen, thanks. Go watch the movie. Let us know what you think. And I guess we'll see. You know, we'll see what happens with Alex Garland after this because he said he's done directing. So
Yeah.
time will tell.
He's still gonna write. I mean, I think that, you know, like I said, I've tried to stay away from podcasts about Civil War, but I have tried to find interviews with Garland, and his passion is writing. You know, like I said, he wrote The Beach. He wrote this book called The Coma, which is amazing. It's a great read too. It's not long. And of course, wrote Ex Machina, wrote Men, wrote this
Yeah.
Civil War. So he's gonna write. He's gonna continue to write. I think directing is just it's a huge undertaking, right? And you have to deal with
Yeah.
studios, and like he can say, "Here's my screenplay. Let's make it a reality." But he'll be in the zeitgeist of films, no doubt, in some form
Yeah.
or fashion.
For sure.
So,
Hell yeah. Well, cool, Anthony. We'll be back next week, and we'll be talking about another movie, another album. So we'll see you guys then.
yes, sir.
Peace,
Peace.
brother.
Take care.